The general public doesn't know their names. However, their contribution to Ukraine's fight is huge. Their support is appreciated both in the rear and on the front line. They are the ones who bring our victory over the enemy closer. They are the fellows of Ukraine. Hi, this is the Fellows of Ukraine project from You Donation. We want to tell about the people who have been helping Ukraine since the Russian invasion, despite being hundreds and thousands of kilometers away. We will tell their story through the prism of Ukrainian realities. Our guest today is Thomas Lukaszuk, former Deputy Prime Minister of the Canadian Province of Alberta and former Minister for Advanced Education and Enterprise. He co-organized $35 million in aid to Ukraine, which was one of the largest private charities in Canada. My name is Lisa, and I hope that we will have a really interesting conversation today. The first question will be about your life. Tell us a little bit about your life story. Where did you grow up? What was your family like?
Of course. I was born in Poland. And I lived in Poland up until I was 13 years old. And most of my life in Poland, I spent in a city called Gdynia, right on the Baltic Sea. And Gdynia was an important city during that time because that's where the Solidarity movement started, the opposition to Polish government. So when I was a child, strikes and riots in the streets, that was part of my childhood. That's what I used to witness. When I was about 11 years old, my father defected. He walked off of a ship in Canada. And so for the next 3 years, my childhood was about interviews with communist police and trying to figure out what happened. And finally, in December 1982, Polish government decided that we have to leave. My mother, my brother, and I, we have to leave. They simply didn't want us in Poland at that time. So they gave us 5 days to pack everything we own, and they gave us a one-way passport and to leave Poland. So we left. So we became refugees here in Canada. So that was my childhood in Poland. And even though, there were tanks in the streets and army in the streets, I still had a good childhood. I really enjoyed my time in Poland. And then we became refugees in Canada. And we first lived in the eastern part of Canada, in Sydney, Nova Scotia. And then we relocated. We drove across all of Canada, some 4.5, almost 5,000 kilometers to where I am right now in Western Canada. Here I got educated. I became a teacher. I taught for a while in high schools. Then I started my own business. I was self-employed. I got elected into an elected office. I was elected for what's considered in Canada a long time, 14, almost 15 years. And so that's sort of my private life. I have 2 daughters. One now lives in Berlin. She's studying. One is still at home over here. But I've always been involved in volunteering. I started an NGO that builds playgrounds for children all over the world. We take down used playgrounds in Canada. We refurbish them, make them like brand new, and we ship them in containers to different countries. And then we fly there and we build them. Cambodia, Nicaragua, Philippines, Vietnam. We've been building playgrounds for very poor children in poor countries. I volunteer with local organizations here, with the Polish Canadian organization. So volunteering has always been a big part of my life. So that's sort of my private life. And now I'm involved in private business as well, in financial services that I started about 3-4 years ago. And that keeps me busy. And when I have free time, I travel. Travel is very important. And part of my travel, I was actually in Ukraine in 2014 during the Orange Revolution. I thought, this is interesting. I have to see this. This was very inspiring.
2014?
2014. Sorry. Yes, 2014. Yes, 2014 during the Orange Revolution.
It was not Orange Revolution.
It was...
Sorry, 2004.
Yeah.
2004, not 14. 2004. My apologies. So I thought I have to see this. And I was in Europe on vacation during that time in 2004. It was actually just between my second and third election. I had time. I had free time. So I said, I have to go and see it. So I flew into Kiev in 2004 in the winter, and spent some time over there just watching what's going on. And it was so inspiring. I was there for about a week, I think. And so that was my only time that I have ever been to Ukraine. And it was, and that's partly maybe small part of that connection why I decided to get involved in what's going on in Ukraine. So that gives you a little bit of an overview of my personal life. And I will continue to volunteer, and hopefully I can do something more for Ukraine into the future.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Yeah, sorry, not 14, 4.
Yeah.
Time flies.
I was born in 2005, so I don't have any memories from the Orange Revolution, and it was really interesting for me to hear about that experience from you.
I tell you, it was interesting because I was, at that point in time, I traveled. I was actually traveling for about a month and a half all over the world. And without a plan, I was just sort of figure, okay, I'm going to go there next. And I was in Lebanon. And I saw on the news what's going on in Ukraine. And I'll never forget, I'm not sure what statue it is, but in the middle of Kiev, there's a statue. And they made a big, massive scarf. It was probably 200 meters long, and they had it wrapped around the neck of that statue. And people were in the streets, hundreds of thousands of people in the streets. And I thought, this would be interesting to see. This is a historical moment. So I flew into Poland, and then I took a train into Kiev. And I watched it, and I sat there. And what I found really inspiring, that old babas were bringing out soup and feeding people. And, it was like one big, massive family. It was really interesting. It was like a big sort of party in the streets. And it was peaceful. It was really peaceful. And that was really interesting because often when you have situations like that, it could become violent. It was peaceful. It was beautiful. It was a very beautiful experience.
And what did influence your decision about moving to Canada?
Really had no choice, to be honest with you. My father walked off the ship to escape communist Poland. And so my mother and my little brother and I were left behind in Poland. And the moment my father walked off the ship, Poland became hell for us. Polish communist government really didn't want us over there. So we had to come and join. So that was number one. I was only 13 years old, so I really didn't get to make that choice, didn't have a decision in it. Poland was right then under martial law, so we had tanks in the street and army was everywhere. It was a horrible place to live in. So the possibility of moving to Canada was something that we took advantage of, and it was looking back, it was a very good decision.
And are you connected somehow with Ukraine? Maybe you have friends or relatives?
Yeah.
I don't have relatives that I know of, but I have many Ukrainian friends here in Canada. There are over 1 million Ukrainians, people of Ukrainian heritage, living in Canada. So Ukrainian culture is very prevalent in Canada. So I have many friends, many colleagues, people I work with that are of Ukrainian heritage. So that's one connection. But second of all, Poland and Ukraine are neighbors, and our cultures between Poland and Ukraine are so similar. Languages are even similar. So there is definitely a connection. It's sort of like brothers and sisters living next door. And we're Slavs. So that connection is very important. But my real reason for getting involved in Ukraine is not because I know somebody. Because even if Ukraine was in the middle of Africa, I probably would do the same thing. It's just the right thing to do. Ukrainians are human beings, are people that are in need of help, and if we have any way of helping, we must help. So I often get asked, what is my connection to Ukraine? There's only one connection. I'm a human being, and Ukrainians are human beings, and that's the only connection that there really needs to be.
By the way, at what point did you understand that you wanted to be actively involved in civic activities, in politics?
Good question. This was never part of a plan. I was involved in business at the time when I started getting involved in politics, and but I was asked actually by a premier if I would get involved, if I would like to run for office. And initially, I never thought that this was a good idea. It was something I wasn't really interested in. But the premier kept insisting, and I said, okay, I'll consider it. And I never thought that I would get elected, to be honest with you. When I ran for office, I never thought I would win. And so I was probably the most surprised person on election day that I won the election. But I always volunteered, even before I was involved in office, outside of my work and family life, I was always involved in volunteering for different NGOs and organizations. I was always involved in sort of in the community, both locally and nationally. So that was probably part of it. I like to get involved in issues. If I didn't like something, I would get engaged and involved. So politics was natural, but it was never part of my plan. I never planned to be elected. This was never part of my career plan. It just happened, and I'm glad I didn't. I was surprised to be in office for that long. I was in office for 4 terms, which is a long time in Canada. But Canadians kept re-electing me, and I enjoyed it. Politics is a tough thing to do, but you can do a lot of good through politics. So I stuck around for about 14 and a half years, I think.
Where has you worked throughout your life, and what obstacles did you face?
Well, the biggest obstacle in my life probably was immigration. Immigration is probably one of the hardest things that a person can go through. That's why, I feel for refugees, Ukrainian and then all other refugees, because it is really hard to leave your friends, leave your town, leave your family, leave everything, and move to another country across the world where there is a different culture, different language. And where you sort of don't belong, you're not from there. Everything is new. That was difficult. So that was probably one of the biggest obstacles that I ever faced in my life.
And what about your career?
My career? Interesting. I have to say I was very fortunate in my career. For those reasons that I just mentioned, that it's difficult to be a refugee, I think that's the reason why Canadians actually elected me, because I had a different perspective on life. I was looking at problems from a different angle, from a different perspective, and they were looking for something different, something new, and that's what I ended up offering. So I think that disadvantage became an advantage in this particular case. I can't really identify major obstacles in my career. Politics actually is full of obstacles. Politics is a rough business. So every day you deal with stress and obstacles, and you deal with the opposition, and then you deal with the opposition within your own political party, and you can never make everybody happy. There's always critics and people unhappy with what you do. So, in politics, all you do is deal with obstacles, but no obstacles that were too large to handle. I changed my careers often, but I don't consider that being an obstacle. I was doing that by choice. I enjoyed that. I was sort of reinventing myself every time, and I just did that again very recently. So I have to say, when it comes to my career, I never had a long-term plan. Things would just happen, and I would embrace them and just go along with it.
What was the most interesting
I never saw
period
those
in your
things
career?
as obstacles. It's a good question. Probably being deputy premier, because I was a cabinet minister, in a number of different portfolios, and then I was just an elected member. But being a deputy premier probably was the most interesting part, because when you're deputy premier, you're responsible for most or all of the portfolios. You have to be on top of everything. Every minister's portfolio, you have to understand and be on top of it, because you get asked questions about everything in government, not just one ministry. So that's something that was very challenging. And when the premier is absent, you become the premier. So you always have to be on top of everything. So that was probably a very interesting aspect. But my current career, I started a few years ago a brand new in Canada financial company that deals with Muslims. Exclusively provides Muslims with financial services because of Muslim religious limitations. They cannot deal with regular banks. And starting that business and learning about Islam, because I'm not Muslim, and developing financial programs for Muslims and dealing with Muslim families and lending them money for buying homes. That has been a very interesting experience for me. A lot of learning, a lot of appreciating of another religion and other cultures. I have to say that this was a big, massive learning curve that I really enjoyed.
Where were you when Russia announced a full-scale invasion? What was your reaction? Maybe it was expected for you.
The first invasion happened much earlier, so we already knew that Russia is capable of a full-on invasion, and we had intelligence that was telling us that it's going to happen. So there was an expectation, an anticipation that we knew, but we didn't know when, and we hoped that Putin would reconsider. But when it actually happened, I saw it on the news, and it reminded me of my childhood when I saw tanks rolling in. It reminded me of a picture in my head when my mother woke me up in the middle of the night. It was about 2:00 in the morning, and said, "Come to the window, come to the window." And I came to the window, and there were literally hundreds, if not thousands, of tanks rolling right in front of our house, our apartment building. Because we lived on a major street in Gdynia. So there was that sort of flashback of my childhood. And I remember I was glued to the television watching that invasion. I stayed up and just kept watching it on TV for the next few days. I followed all the developments very closely. And that's shortly thereafter. That's when I decided there must be something I can do.
How are you currently involved in helping Ukraine?
At this point in time, I'm doing two things, because our major action has ended of the United for Ukraine, of shipping supplies to Ukraine. So now, number one, I'm involved in taking care of Ukrainian refugees right here in Canada. So I'm personally in touch with a number of families, but also I'm part of an NGO that is taking care of Ukrainians. A variety of things. Sometimes just being a friend and being there for them, somebody to talk to, and sometimes actually helping them with issues and helping them resolve problems here in Canada. So that's one. The second one, I am putting together a group of Canadians that will get involved in reconstruction of Ukraine's of Ukraine once the war is over. So putting together Canadian businesses and others that will be ready and willing to help when the reconstruction of Ukraine begins on full scale. So putting together a team that will be ready to be there for Ukraine.
Do you cooperate maybe with your government or with the Ukrainian government?
I cooperate with our government. So our Canadian government was extremely helpful when we sent that $35 million worth of goods. Our Deputy Prime Minister Freeland was very helpful, her office, to make sure that we get help with customs and the paperwork that is required to ship airplanes and containers. So I work with government for sure in Canada. I work with NGOs, with the Ed Stelmach Foundation, with the Polish Canadian Historical Society, and other volunteer groups here in Canada. And obviously during that major activity, the Polish Airlines lot, and even Polish government was then helpful because we were flying refugees into Canada from Poland, and they were helping us process all the documents. Our Canadian embassy in Warsaw was extremely helpful as well. So there are many partners involved, and I hate listing because you always end up missing some, but there are just a large group of organizations and individual people that were involved.
What was the first aid you sent to Ukraine, and how did you organize all the processes?
Just like the rest of my life, it happened without a lot of planning. I was watching news about what was happening in Ukraine. And late at night, I called my friend, my colleague from government, the former premier of Alberta, Ed Stelmach. And I said, Ed, and he is of Ukrainian heritage, very proud Ukrainian Canadian. And I said, Ed, there must be something that we can do. I'm sure we can collect some things that Ukraine needs and ship them to Ukraine. And he agreed. So I said, tomorrow morning, I'll call the Ukrainian embassy in Ottawa. And I'll ask the Ukrainian embassy, what is it that they need? What can we ship to Ukraine? And I did that. And Ukrainian embassy provided me with a list of what is really badly needed in Ukraine right now. And that included medical equipment, medication, emergency equipment and things of that nature. And then food, clothing, camping gear, survival gear, things of that nature. So the next day, I put out a message on social media, on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, that we will be collecting those items. I secured a place in Edmonton, downtown Edmonton, and I said, please deliver your donations to this location. And Mr. Ed Stelmach and I, we honestly thought we will get, a little bit, maybe enough to ship one container. Boy, were we wrong. Donations just kept coming and coming. We, in about 2 hours, filled a warehouse full of stuff. And then we did this again 2 days later. And it was just amazing how much stuff we had. We ended up in 2 days with more than $35 million worth of donations. But not only from individual people, but cities and police departments and fire departments and hospitals were coming and donating stuff. So after those 2 days, we had 2 warehouses full of equipment and stuff. So it took us about a week to sort it, to put it into different categories. And we noticed that we had a lot of very valuable medical equipment. We had X-ray machines, MRI machines, ultrasounds, hospital equipment, hospital beds, things that were very valuable. We had entire surgical kits for performing surgeries from surgeons. So we decided that this stuff needs to get to Ukraine right away because it's needed right away. So I made a deal with Polish Airlines LOT to fly a Boeing 787, a Dreamliner, from Warsaw to Edmonton. They never fly to Edmonton, so they made a special flight to Edmonton to pick up that stuff, and we filled that airplane with medical equipment, just medical equipment, and medications. We got a lot of medications, first aid kits, and things of that nature. So that airplane flew, delivered everything to Warsaw, and then volunteers shipped it across the border to Ukraine. But then after that, we had to still a lot of stuff, diapers and food and first aid kits and stuff like that needed to get there. But we put those onto containers. So I believe, I'm not sure how many, but at least 12 or 16 containers were shipped to Ukraine after, with stuff that could wait a little longer. Not as important as medical equipment, so we just kept shipping containers, packing them and shipping them for probably 2-3 months.
We would like to hear some stories that inspire you to continue helping. Maybe there were situations that touch you to the core.
There were, when we were dealing with Canadians, individual Canadians, to Canadian businesses and then Canadian institutions donating, I have to tell you, that was very inspiring, because we didn't anticipate, such a big donation. We honestly thought that we will get, few boxes of things that we will ship by courier to Ukraine, and that's it. And when we saw this lineup, so, the first inspiring thing was we started collecting at 9 o'clock in the morning, and this big parking lot where we were collecting things is right across from a hospital in Edmonton. And the convoy of cars, there were thousands of cars lining up first thing in the morning to make a donation, was so long that we had to call police in Edmonton to help us with traffic, to make sure that the traffic is not blocking the rest of the city, because ambulances couldn't get to the hospital because there was this big convoy of cars donating to us. So, when I saw this long line of cars with donations, and what was really inspiring about that is that it wasn't just Ukrainians that live in Canada, or Polish people that live in Canada. It was East Indians and Pakistani and Africans and Vietnamese and Chinese. Canada is a country of immigrants. And there was everybody, that when we were unloading the cars, people would open their trunk or their car or their truck, and bring out boxes. There were people from all over the world. They were just, and often I would ask why, and they said, well, we're refugees too. We are immigrants too. We have to help out. So people would help out. So that was very inspiring. What was really inspiring too is that a lot of people went to stores, they bought things that were on that list from the Ukrainian embassy, and then they put them into beautiful boxes, and they wrote messages on the boxes, to the families in Ukraine that will receive that stuff. And that was very inspiring. Some most beautiful messages. Some children wrote beautiful cards to Ukrainian children. So that was really heartbreaking. But there was one particular moment in the warehouse where we were storing all those things. We had about 100 volunteers working, sorting things, putting them into boxes. This old lady showed up, and she was probably 90 years old, with a box of eggs. She had 12 eggs in a box. And she says, "This is my donation to Ukraine." And I thought, well, this is strange. This poor old lady, she didn't understand what's going on, but she wanted to do something. And in her mind, everybody needs eggs. Everybody eats eggs. So she donated eggs. Well, obviously, we didn't ship the eggs to Ukraine. Our volunteers made a breakfast of it. But the fact is, even an old lady like this saw something on the news and she wanted to somehow help out. So everybody was helping any way they could. And some people who couldn't help, they just showed up at the warehouse and volunteered, helped us pack. Because when you have this much stuff, you need a lot of volunteers that will pack things properly, make lists of everything, put it in a container. So a lot of people were just simply donating their time. So it was all very inspiring. I've never seen anything like this happen. And it turned out to be the biggest in Canada ever foreign aid mission that just occurred because of a tweet and a Facebook posting.
Did something happen that made you lose your faith in your work?
Not lose my faith, for sure. I think maybe something horrible happened, but it actually reinvigorated me. But I have a tendency of turning negative into positive. So what happened once this stuff arrived in Poland, it was unpacked from airplanes or from containers, put into small vehicles, and then Polish and Ukrainian volunteers would drive it across the border and drive deep into eastern Ukraine, into occupied parts of Ukraine. And there was one vehicle with 2 Ukrainians and 1 Polish man driving it. And they got intercepted by Russians and 2 got killed. 1 survived and 2 got killed. That was horrible. Because we considered them our volunteers as well. They were delivering our stuff to Ukraine. When we found that out, we took a moment of silence in the warehouse. All the volunteers stopped work. Some prayed for those that died. So, that was really, really discouraging. But then the volunteers started working even harder. That means we have to send more stuff. So we sort of doubled down on that. But no, you know what? In cases of war and hardship, you have to turn negative into positive and use negative as an encouragement to do more. So that's exactly what we were doing. And I hope that this ends soon and that we never have to do this again. But it's also good to know that if we ever have to do this again, there is that will. There are people here that are willing to help.
Do you have any plans for your future initiatives or projects?
Well, the big plan is to continue working with refugees because they do need help. It's not easy to be a refugee in a new country, especially if you don't speak English in Canada, especially if you're a mom with children. So helping with refugees is one thing, but I think the next important thing is helping with reconstruction and getting Canadian businesses prepared for that. There are many Canadian large companies that can do a lot of work in Ukraine with construction, but not only construction. Ukraine will need a lot of soft services, psychological, psychiatric, and other services that Canada can offer. So that is something that we need to focus on, not just building bridges and roads and hospitals and schools. We need to also put that infrastructure, that social infrastructure of psychologists, psychiatrists, physiotherapists, all those services for wounded soldiers, for people with post-traumatic stress disorder, building orphanages for children that lost their parents. We will need to put in those services as well. So I think Canada has a lot of ability to be helpful on that front as well.
Thank you for being honest, and it was very interesting interview for me. And every Ukrainian now feels your support. It's very important for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, you have a lot of support in Canada, I can tell you, and you can count on Canada, not only on Canadian government, but you can count on Canadians, which is even more important. They're 100% with you.
So that's all.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Nice meeting you.
Have a good day.
Okay, you too. Take care. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Have a good day. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe for more.